Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to CBHN's Health for Life series on prediabetes and prevention. My name is Amber Busby. I'm the Associate Program Manager at the California Black Health Network. And today we are here for session 3 of the 7-part series, Control the Controllable. In this series, and specifically today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Candice A. Price, who I will introduce momentarily. And we will talk about dietary guidelines, impacts of sugar as they relate to type 2 diabetes, and explore food marketing exposure and how it can lead to unhealthy choices for food consumption. As always, we'll also have a resource page for your use. It's always embedded in our post survey as well. While this webinar is designed to be interactive throughout the session, you will be muted. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature for comments or questions, or to put any questions in the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to share a little bit about CBHN in case any attendees are unfamiliar with our organization. The California Black Health Network's vision is a California where every African American and Black immigrant has the opportunity to live long, healthy lives free from violence, racism, and health inequities, regardless of their education, socioeconomic class, zip code, sexual orientation, gender identity, housing, or immigration status, and have access to high quality and equitable primary and behavioral health care, and avoid unnecessarily succumbing to diseases. We do this through outreach, education, policy, and advocacy work. At this time, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Candice Price, who is a metabolism and nutrition scientist whose career has focused on understanding the development and prevention of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. She received her PhD in endocrinology at UC Berkeley, where she studied alternate day fasting and the role of fat cells in the development of insulin resistance. During her time as an assistant professor at the University of California, Davis, Dr. Price investigated the mechanisms by which sugar-sweetened beverage consumption increases the risk for cardiometabolic disease in Black women. Her research portfolio also included examining the impact of naturally sweetened juice intake on health outcomes, the role of the gut microbiome and insulin resistance, psychological stress and sugar consumption, and the potential epigenetic effects of high sugar intake. In addition to her scientific career, Dr. Price is a certified diabetes prevention program coach and started one of the few DPP programs in the Sacramento region. So it is with great pleasure that I go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Price. Thank you.
Great. Good evening. Thank you all for joining today. So today is all about nutrition and breaking barriers to healthy eating. So our main goal today is to have you understand the dietary guidelines. So we'll introduce the dietary guidelines for Americans, and then most of our time will be spent on discussing barriers to healthy eating. So today I hope you will take away understanding what it means to eat a healthy diet, understanding the difference between hunger and appetite, recognize common barriers to healthy eating, tools to overcome these barriers, how to read nutrition facts, and understand the importance of reducing added sugar in your diet. Okay, so before we get started, let's see what you all know. Okay, so our first question in today's poll is, appetite and hunger are the same thing, true or false? Okay, everybody thinks that this is true, false. Okay, great. Next question. Eating too much sugar is a significant contributor of one's risk for type 2 diabetes. True or false? Okay, most of you think that this is true. A few of you think this is false. Next question. Which of the following typically contain added sugar? You can check all that apply. Soda, regular soda, so this does not include diet, candy, store-bought whole wheat bread, or bananas. Okay, everyone seems to agree that soda contains added sugar, as well as candy and whole wheat bread, and a few of you also think bananas. And next question. The food pyramid created by the USDA provides the latest guidelines on the components of a healthy diet/meal. Okay, so most of you think this is true, and a few of you, about a third of you, think this is false. All right, and one more question, Ambry, I believe.
Yep, last question.
Okay, which of the following are practices that will help you become more conscious of your food and beverage choices? You can select all that apply. Food tracking, measuring out serving sizes, reading nutrition labels, and meal tracking. Okay, so everyone agrees that measuring out serving sizes and reading nutrition labels are great ways to be conscious of your food choices. And the majority of you also think that food tracking and meal tracking are also great ways. Great. Okay, so let's see if some of you are right and if you learned anything new today, which I hope you will, and I think you will. Okay, so the Dietary Guidelines for Americans is what we now use as our guidelines for recommending what it is, what a healthy diet looks like. So this is an evidence-based dietary recommendation, meaning that it's based off of scientific data. The guidance reflects the recognition that nutrition impacts the risk for chronic diseases. So this includes obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And it focuses on nutrients, foods, and beverages consumption as a whole. So not specific items individually as your diet, but understanding that all of these different components and nutrients in the diet are important and need to be considered as part of your entire diet. The guidelines for Americans evolves every 5 years, so it's updated based on new scientific evidence that arises. So what the guidelines are not, it's not a rigid prescription. So it's not telling us the exact amounts of each specific type of food that we're supposed to eat every day. And it's not specific to individuals with specific chronic disease. So if you are someone with type 2 diabetes, this is a guideline that may need to be amended depending on how well your diabetes is controlled. If you have prediabetes, if there's other things to consider like your body weight, et cetera, because we'll talk about how that plays a role into serving sizes, for example, and how many calories you eat every day. Okay, so one important point that I want to make, the dietary guidelines is a guide to help you get the nutrients that you need every day for optimal metabolic function and health. So your diet is the sum of your food that's consumed, right? But nutrition is the biochemical and the physiological process by which an organism uses food to support life. So when we think about diet or improving our diet, sometimes it can help to reframe our thought about diet as receiving nutrition, right? Because nutrition is all about helping our bodies to live optimally. And this is why we eat food and drink water, right? We're trying to help our body survive. And when we're young, we're helping our body develop and grow into a healthy adult. So we have to feed the nutrients that it needs in order to perform optimally for longevity and optimal health. So when we think about the nutrients that we're consuming, we have to be conscious of the quality of our diet and not just focusing on the calories, which is what we tend to do. We tend to focus on just how many calories that we're eating, rather than focusing on the overall consumption of the nutrients that we're consuming. And so the guidelines highlights the consumption of nutrient-dense foods and the minimal consumption of low nutrient foods. So when I say nutrient dense, I mean foods that are high in lean, lean and low in fat, and contain vitamins and minerals, adequate amounts of vitamins and minerals. Whereas low nutrient foods are foods that are high in saturated fat, sugar, and salt. And those are the things that we want to eat minimal amounts of. So you may have all remembered the food pyramid, which is no longer used. The dietary guidelines replaces that. And instead they provide recommendations for various food groups, which are highlighted in bold, and then there's subgroups which are underneath. So taking, for example, vegetables, the recommendation for vegetable consumption is 2.5 cups per day. And it then breaks down the subgroups under the category of vegetables. So this includes dark greens, red and orange vegetables, beans, lentils, starchy vegetables, and other vegetables. And here the servings are provided in cups per week. And the idea around that is you want to have a diverse diet. You want to not eat the same type of food every day, but mix it up a bit. So out of each week, the goal is to have 1.5 cups of dark green vegetables a week, 5.5 cups of red and orange vegetables, 1.5 cups of beans, lentils, 5 cups of starchy vegetables, and 4 cups of any other types of vegetables. And the idea again behind that is getting as many nutrients as possible by diversifying your vegetable intake and diversifying your diet intake as a whole with the consumption of fruits, grains, different sources of protein, dairy, and then limiting things like saturated fats and salt intake and added sugar. Now, this recommendation here is based off of 2,000 calorie diet. When we talk about nutrition facts, you'll notice that nutrition facts are also based off of a 2,000 calorie diet. Now, there's the guidelines also provide suggestions for guidelines based on higher calorie intake. So they as low as 1,600 up to 3,000 calories. And that's going to really depend on your body weight, whether or not you're male or female, your height, and how physically active you are. So there is a calculator. I'll provide that source later on in the webinar where you can go and calculate how many calories, an estimate of how many calories that you are required to eat per day to maintain your body weight. Okay, so that's an important distinction. This isn't the amount of calories that you need to lose weight, but it's the amount of calories to maintain your weight. Now, the caveat to that, of course, is that let's say you start taking note of how many calories you are eating every day, and maybe you're eating 2,800 calories, but when you calculate your requirement, you're really only supposed to be eating 2,400 calories. So in that situation, you would notice that if you actually only ate 2,400 calories, then you would lose weight. If you are trying to lose weight and you notice that you're just staying stagnant and but are consuming the necessary amount of calories based on your calculation, then you can reduce your caloric intake in order to work on weight loss, in addition to improving physical activity. And so you'll notice that if you look at this in more detail, we're not going to go through it today, but you can see that the recommended amounts vary a little bit depending on how many total calories you need to consume each day. Okay, so the dietary guidelines I said was a compilation of your whole diet, right? Understanding your diet as a whole, not just a specific intake of certain nutrients. And so you are evaluated on how well your diet aligns with these dietary guidelines based on what's called the Healthy Eating Index score, HEI for short. It's rated on a scale from 0 to 100, with 0 being the worst and 100 being ideal. So if the higher the score, the higher intake of nutritious foods and beverages. So it's really important to have a high HEI because this is associated with lower low density lipoproteins, which if you attended the last webinar, you know that this is what we call the quote unquote bad cholesterol. And having higher levels of HDL increases your risk for cardiovascular disease. Higher HEE is also associated with better insulin sensitivity. If you attended the first webinar, you would know that insulin sensitivity means how well your body is responding to insulin and taking up that glucose. It's also associated with reduction of inflammatory biomarkers such as C-reactive proteins and pro-inflammatory interleukins. Now, across the board, Americans are really not doing well in terms of meeting the dietary guidelines. So these are the HEI scores amongst children and adolescents. And you can see between the ages of 2 and 4, they have the highest score. It's still only 61, so it's not optimal. But you might notice that as you get older and get into the teenage years, that score goes down some. This is likely due to the fact that teenagers have more autonomy. They might have access to money. They are more independent and they have greater access to different foods outside of the home. And so it's really important that we help establish healthy eating habits at a young age so that when they do become more independent and are making their own food choices, that they know how to make healthy choices. When we look across age groups, we do see similar HEI scores. So ages 19 through 30, we see an average score of 56. In adults 31 through 59, we see a score of 59. And in adults 60 and older, we see a score of 63. Now, these charts that you saw in the previous slides basically represent how well each of these age groups are meeting the dietary guidelines. So each of these are the different categories of nutrients, and across the board, we're all consuming too few vegetables compared to the recommendation. So the recommendation is in green, the green bars, and the purple dots are the average intake in males and females. And so this is in older adults. You can see we're not meeting our vegetable intake. Same with fruit intake and dairy. And we see the similar pattern in all age groups. And in older adults, they actually have, we actually see lower protein intake amongst women. So we have a lot of areas to improve with our diet. When we look at racial differences in eating patterns, we typically find that Blacks tend to have lower HEI scores as compared with whites and other race and ethnic groups. So this small study here found that fiber, micronutrients, so micronutrients are things like vitamins and minerals, were lower amongst Black women. And when they examined differences in the routines of Black and white women, they found that the Black women tended to drive to the grocery store, whereas the white women had more that were walking to the grocery store. So this, of course, might be linked to the neighborhood that they live in, right? Structural differences in neighborhood access to grocery stores and safe neighborhoods to walk in to grocery stores as well. And also Black women tended to shop less frequently throughout the month. So what this suggests is that they're consuming more processed foods that have longer shelf life and a lower intake of fresh produce. This study here looked at different barriers to healthy eating. And so they provided a questionnaire to the participants. And just to highlight that the strongest barriers associated with low healthy eating index scores were reports of fast food being more convenient. So about half of the respondents concluded this, and followed by cost was the second leading barrier, and the third leading barrier was time to prepare healthy foods. So that brings me to discussing all our barriers to healthy eating. So number one is knowledge, right? We're going to talk about what it means to eat healthy. We've already introduced the guidelines, but really what does that look like and how can you implement that? Misunderstanding of healthy eating. So sometimes we think that we're making healthy choices, but in fact, it may not be a healthy choice. And we will learn how to make those decisions better. The influence of our family and community and our cultural influences. Time, of course, is a major one. Cost, and especially now with inflation, groceries are so much more expensive. And of course, food marketing, which we don't talk about enough, but this is a serious issue and really is plaguing our community and Hispanic communities with these industries targeting Black and Hispanics and contributing to the high consumption of low nutrient foods. Okay, so really quickly, talking about the influence of our family and culture. So many of us probably grew up with the notion that you need to eat everything on your plate. Now, the problem with this, which I'll talk about at the very end of today's webinar, is this basically overrides your brain's signals that's telling your stomach to stop eating, that you're full, right? So when we're telling our children to eat everything on your plate, we're essentially promoting habits that can lead to excess weight gain and obesity. Eating while we watch TV, similarly, we're also not listening to those hunger signals, our satiety signals telling our body, or our brain telling our body that we're full and satisfied and don't need to eat any additional foods. When we're eating and watching TV or eating and doing something else, we're just mindlessly eating. We're not actually listening to our bodies and understanding whether or not we still need to consume food. And then there's the practice of eating when not hungry. So this might be eating mindlessly while watching TV, or when your parent tells you to eat everything on your plate, or when you go visit a family and they offer you food. And sometimes in some cultures that can be deemed as being rude if you don't accept, or it's rude if you also don't finish everything on your plate, right? And then of course there's family recipes that have been influenced by a westernized diet, so things that are high in fat and sugar, and passing these recipes, throughout the generations, which is great, but understanding are there ways that maybe we can alter these recipes to be healthier? So what are some tools that you can use? So understanding nutrition facts, which we're going to talk about second, paying attention to serving size and portion sizes, knowing how to cook. So if you lack the cooking skills to cook healthy, then you are kind of stuck when it comes to diversifying your foods, right? Foreign foods, how do I cook this? Same thing. Sometimes you might go to the food bank and get a free box of produce, and some of the produce you have no idea how to cook. Maybe you haven't even seen it before. And so this contributes to low consumption of vegetables as well. How to make dishes healthier. So, palatability is important, right? We want to enjoy the food that we eat. And sometimes we don't understand how can we reduce some of the unhealthy things in the dish, but still make it taste good. And then very importantly, being mindful of added sugar intake, saturated fats, and sodium, which we'll talk about some more. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is how to read nutrition facts, because this is pretty much key to implementing a lot of our healthy behaviors, especially when we're grocery shopping or eating out. And so how would you know if something is that you're purchasing at the store is healthy? Well, you need to be able to look at the nutrition facts. So the top of the nutrition facts states the serving size. Then there's the calories. Typically, most of us will probably look at the calories first, and then we might even pay attention to the calories from fat. Then the second place we look at usually are this section highlighted in yellow, looking at the fat content. Also, a lot of us tend to look at the carbohydrate content, and then we look at the percent. Now, this percent daily value is really the key area where most people get confused around understanding what the nutrition label is actually telling us. So I think oftentimes people think that so let's take total fat, for example, 18%. They might interpret this to mean, okay, this food item has 18% fat in it, right? But actually what this is saying is this food item, and this is an example of macaroni and cheese, I think of frozen mac and cheese. This food item contains 18% of your allotted total fat calories that you should be consuming every day. So based on a 2,000 calorie diet, this contributes 18% of the limit of total fat that you should be consuming. And same with sodium, 20% of sodium that you are allotted in your diet for the day. This contributes 20% of that allotment of sodium. Now, the rule of thumb is the things that are highlighted in yellow, these are the things that we want to consume the lower amounts of, right? We want things that are lower in fat, cholesterol, and lower in sodium. When something is at a range of 20% or higher, that's considered to be to contain high amounts of that nutrient. And so this is important to pay attention to having the sections of fat, cholesterol, sodium be 5% or under is ideal. But for things like vitamins and minerals, which are highlighted in the blue, we want a lot of this in our diet, right? This is what we would look at when we're trying to understand if we're consuming something that's nutrient dense. So this item has 20% calcium in it, which is fantastic. Also has some vitamin A and vitamin C and iron. Now, the tricky part is balancing this with, picking something that's nutrient dense and also has lower amounts of fat and sodium. So to just demonstrate what this percent daily value, sort of how to interpret that again, is let's say you have an item that says it's 37% daily value. That means you have 63% that you are allowed to have that's remaining in your daily value. The recommendation for sodium intake is 2,300 milligrams. This item contains 850 of those 2,300 milligrams. And so when you keep track of your sodium intake, you can really get a good sense of if you're consuming too much sodium or even too little. We need sodium, right? But you don't want to consume something that's so high in sodium, right? So this item here has 74% of our daily value as sodium, and you only have a little bit left remaining in your daily allotment. So paying attention to nutrition facts to look at sodium content is really going to be key to reducing your sodium intake. Most of us in America consume way too much sodium. So I mentioned that the guidelines recommend no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium for anyone over the age of 13. And you can see across the board, all of us are consuming way too much sodium. Now, interestingly, for Black Americans, we have the highest rates of hypertension. And part of this might be explained by higher prevalence of salt sensitivity. So this means when you have changes in blood pressure in response to salt intake. So those 73% of us with hypertension are salt sensitive, and 36 of us without hypertension, normal tensive Blacks, also have salt sensitivity. So this would increase their risk for developing hypertension. And then this salt sensitivity also is known to increase with age. So it's really important to reduce our salt intake. This study here demonstrated that just reducing salt intake by an average of 0.8 teaspoons had significant reduction on blood pressure in Black Americans. Okay, so some tips for reducing sodium: cooking at home, limit how we eat out. Oh, and when we cook at home, being mindful of how much salt we add in our meals. Choosing low sodium or no salt foods. So this could be one, paying attention to the nutrition labels, and also choosing frozen vegetables over canned vegetables, or of course, just choosing fresh vegetables, and then eating less processed foods. So now I want to talk about sugar sweetened beverages, because this is a big issue in our community, and I'll talk about some statistics soon. But so remember, again, paying attention to nutrition facts. This is key when we're picking out our beverages. Of course, the best beverage you can choose is water. A prime example is sweet tea. So this bottle of Arizona sweet tea contains 43 grams of added sugar in it. So that's about 10.5 teaspoons of sugar. Now, I would challenge you all to go measure out 10.5 teaspoons of sugar, put it in a glass of water, and see if it looks appetizing. It probably won't. But when we don't pay attention to our nutrition labels, and many of us Black Americans are the highest consumers of sugar sweetened beverages, so we're consuming a lot of sugar throughout the day. Beverages are not the only food items that contain sugar. The tricky part again here is that this beverage has a lot of vitamin C in it. It has 120. It exceeds the recommended amounts of vitamin C per day. So that's fantastic, but it has way too much sugar and kind of negates the beneficial properties of the vitamin C. So one thing you might ask yourself, well, can I dilute this to make it less sweet? Yes, you can, but be mindful of what that looks like. Diluting it and drinking the whole bottle throughout the day, but just making it less sweet, still not as beneficial, because you're still consuming 43 grams of sugar just from that drink that day. But maybe pouring out a little bit, diluting it, and consuming that bottle over multiple days is a better way to go if you have to have a sugar sweetened beverage. Also, sometimes if you're someone that regularly drinks sweetened beverages, it's really hard to just go cold turkey and completely cut out sugar sweetened beverages. So diluting sweet drinks is a good way to start weaning yourself down. Over time, your palate will adjust and you'll become used to things that are less sweet. And if you do that for months, and then you try to drink the same amount of sugar you had before, you'll notice that it is entirely too sweet and you don't like it, which is what we want. Okay, so sugar sweet beverages are the largest single source of sugar in our diet. Typically, when we talk about things that have added sugar, we're typically talking about things that contain either high fructose corn syrup or sucrose. So high fructose corn syrup, you all know, is very commonly used in sodas and sweetened drinks. Sucrose is the same thing as table sugar, and there's a lot of confusion about whether or not one is better than the other. Unfortunately, the beverage industry tried to make it so that they promoted the use of sucrose in their beverages, but unfortunately, it actually has the same detrimental effects on your body. High fructose corn syrup could be potentially, you could argue that it might be a little worse, but they both can contribute to decreases in metabolic function, such as increase in liver fat. And I'll highlight some of those metabolic effects a few slides from now. So these are just some examples here of things that do contain added sugar that maybe we don't always think about. So barbecue sauce, maybe you might think about that if you've made it before. Whole wheat bread. I have never come across a whole wheat bread that does not contain added sugar. It always has added sugar in it. And then yogurt. Yogurt is a major source of added sugar that we never think about because we always think that it's a healthy option, which it is, but you want to try to opt for yogurt that does not, that just plain yogurt that's not flavored and does not contain added sugar. And of course, there's several other sources, but these are just a few examples of some of the sneaky items. So again, paying attention to our labels is important. Ooh. Okay, so the dietary guidelines recommends that we don't consume more than 10% of our calories as added sugar. So I'm providing you examples in the form of a can of soda. So based on a 2,200 calorie diet, that would be about a can and some change of soda. But if you are basing it off of the recommendations by the World Health Organization and the American Heart American Heart Association, both of these recommend that we consume no more than 5% of our calories as added sugar per day. And the American Heart Association specifically recommends no more than 150 calories for men and 100 calories for women. And so that would equate to not even a whole can of soda, just a little over half a can of soda per day. Now, keep in mind, if you have prediabetes, you certainly want to stick in the 5% recommendation. And really, if you can consume no sugar sweetened beverages, that would be ideal. Okay, so 82% of us exceed the dietary recommendations for added sugar consumption. About on average, we're consuming 17.5% of calories as added sugar. So that's about almost 2.5 cans of soda per day. 17% of Black Americans consume as much as 25% of our calories as added sugar. So this is almost 3.5 cans of soda per day. And these estimates are based off of about a 2,200 calorie diet. So if you consume even more calories, then you can imagine how many sugar sweetened beverages that is. Now, importantly, consuming 15% of our calories as sugar sweetened beverages increases the risk for type 2 diabetes in Black women by 51%. So imagine if you already have a family history of diabetes and you're a regular high consumer of sugar sweetened beverages, you really want to take the steps to try to reduce that intake now. Sugar sweetened beverage intake is also associated with a 33% risk of stroke in women, and 2 or more sugar sweetened beverage intake is associated with a 31% increased risk for cardiovascular disease. Now, I just wanted to highlight that sugar sweetened beverage consumption is associated with chronic diseases, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension. And it is no coincidence, I would argue, that the disparities that we see with obesity, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease also mimic the prevalence of sugar sweetened beverage consumption. So here you've seen Black hypertension prevalence in Blacks, obesity prevalence, and diabetes prevalence. And so I'll end the portion of our sugar consumption intake just to point out that, when we consume too much added sugar, we're increasing our risk for type 2 diabetes by 25%. We're increasing our total body fat, our total visceral fat storage. So this is the storage that's surrounding our organs. This is deeper within the abdominal cavity. We're reducing our insulin sensitivity. So that's how well our body can respond to insulin and control our blood glucose levels. We're increasing the amount of fat stored in the liver, which of course also contributes to dyslipidemia. So an increase in triglycerides and cholesterol production that ends up in circulation, increase in uric acid, which is a risk factor for gout, and I mentioned the increase in blood cholesterol and triglycerides. So really quickly, saturated fats you should have no more than 10% of your calories come from saturated fats, but many more of us are consuming this, which you can see here. And examples of sources of saturated fat include red meat, pork, poultry, dairy, eggs, coconut oil, and palm oil. You'll know something is a saturated fat even if it's a solid under warm temperatures, if at room temperature, or excuse me, even if it's a liquid under warm temperatures, if at room temperature it's a solid, it is likely a source of saturated fat. And here are just some common food items that we consume in our diets that are also high in saturated fat and things that we should be mindful of limiting. So similarly to sodium, how might you reduce your intake of saturated fats? Cooking at home, choosing lean meats, limiting eating out, eating less processed foods, and consuming low-fat dairy products. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the tools that you can use to improve your nutrition and your overall diet and get a higher healthy eating index. So tracking your food. So in webinar 1, I put in a plug for the diabetes prevention program. I will put in another plug for that as well. This is one of our modules that we talk about is tracking your food, and really the whole program involves tracking your food. And so this will help you understand how much of something that you're eating. So you also need to look at nutrition labels so that you can jot down, how much fat is in the item you're looking at, using measuring cups and spoons to measure out your items as you're preparing your meals. Carrying around a notebook or some kind of pad, or I guess you could put it on in your phone as well to track your items. So when you look at your daily intake, you might want to make a copy of this, put it on your kitchen wall, so you can be mindful of the recommendations of how much of each of these food groups should you be eating. One of the really cool tools that we talk about in the diabetes prevention program is using things that are just around the house or our hands to measure the quantity of our foods if we don't have access to a measuring cup. So if you look at the palm of your hand, that's about 3 ounces. And if you make a closed fist, that would be about 1 cup. There's some additional tools as well, using your thumb to measure a teaspoon or tablespoon, or using some of these items as well to measure cups or ounces. So if you do food tracking, you would do something somewhat like this, but you can go into a lot more detail. So this is just an example of when we're not looking at the nutrition facts and food tracking, which is on our left side here. She's kind of just estimating what she thinks the calories are in that food. But when she took a look at the nutrition facts and measured out each of the items while she was preparing her meals, she got a more accurate count of how many calories she was actually consuming throughout the day. And you can see the discrepancy was 275 calories. And that's just for the dinner. That's not even for the full day. So food tracking is really important if you're trying to lose weight or just trying to overall improve your eating and nutrient intake. Another tool that you can use is the My Plate. It gives you a nice guide for what your plate should look like. So if you go online, this My Plate provides you some examples of what a serving size should look like. So for example, the serving size for vegetables would be 2.5 cups per day. And but what that equates to is going to depend on what type of vegetable you're consuming. So for example, if you're consuming raw spinach, you actually need 2 cups of raw spinach to equal a 1 cup serving of vegetable. So it just depends. This is an example coming again from the diabetes prevention module. They suggest that half of your plate should be vegetables. And so that's a little bit even more stringent than the My Plate guidelines from the dietary guidelines for Americans. And part of the reason for this is this program is specific for individuals with prediabetes. So having an increase in your nutrients and a reduction in non-starchy vegetables is really key. Okay, so time. So when you don't have time to combat that, meal plan. That is key to reducing the time you're eating out. So which of course contributes to also helping with reducing our sodium and saturated fat intake. And it prevents skipping meals. When you skip meals, you end up being really hungry later. And when you're really hungry, you're more likely to make poor food choices. Make a shopping list ahead of time and stick to it. Pre-cutting your veggies ahead of time is great. So that might look like setting a time aside on the weekend for a couple of hours prepping, or when you come home from grocery shopping, immediately prepping those vegetables, and then making meals ahead of time the night before is also very helpful. Another common barrier that we often hear is you can't afford vegetables or healthy food items. So one way to combat this is choosing produce that's in season, tends to be cheaper, clipping coupons, especially now with inflation, shopping around, looking at store ads before you go shopping as you're making your shopping list. If you can, grow your own vegetables, cooking at home, of course, eating out less, keeping staple veggies and ingredients that you can use to make multiple different types of dishes. This can help lower the cost, the overall cost of your grocery bill. And then there's also a nice tool through the USDA that helps strategize for how you can eat healthy on a budget. So I recommend visiting that site, and we'll have resources that'll be sent out, as Amber mentioned, along with the survey. I took the liberty of looking up how much water versus soda would cost. This is at Walmart. Water tends to be the cheapest option. And it used to not be the case. It used to be that we often would find the unhealthy beverages would be cheaper. And so this led to the high consumption of sugar sweetened beverages. But you can see here, the total price is about the same, but you're actually getting more bang for your buck with the water at 19 cents per bottle versus 48 cents per bottle with the soda. So again, being mindful of costs and shopping around and paying attention to nutrition facts. My Plate offers a meal planning tool that's really cool. You can actually scan this now while I'm talking, and it'll bring up a website. There's also an app, but you can use the website, which I've personally found to be actually simpler. And you can make a meal plan and make a grocery shopping list. And they also have some recipes available as well. So if you scan this, it'll send you to a page that looks like this. And if you click on meal plan, it'll help you design healthy meals on a budget. Okay, so lastly, there's some resources as well. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program in California, this is known as CalFresh. This provides food benefits to low-income families to supplement their grocery budget. And then there's also the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, which provides community education classes for income-eligible young adults and youth. And this is delivered through the University of California Cooperative Extension. Okay, so the last thing I'll try to talk about in 2 minutes is food marketing and its impact on our communities and how this is a major barrier to us for making healthy food choices. So targeted marketing is the marketing strategy of directing products and product promotions to groups of consumers with similar characteristics. So this might be done through television ads, billboards that are tailored in certain neighborhoods and other local media markets. So this is an example of what you might see driving down the highway. This one is ironic because above they have the childhood obesity poster, and right below they have a billboard, sorry, it's cut off, for McDonald's. So it's a little contradictory. And then these low cost billboards advertising really inexpensive beverages. And it's not just the low cost, but it's also the visual cue. If you're someone that regularly consumes sugar sweetened beverages, this is going to send a signal to your brain, oh my gosh, I want that right now, and it's only $1, so I should go stop and get it. Buy one, get one free. When we are maybe facing food insecurity or don't even have access to healthier food items that maybe seem like they're not in our budget, this buy one, get one free burger seems like a really great option for us, especially if we have a family to feed, right? We feel like we're getting more bang for our buck. And then of course, advertisements like this promote unhealthy eating at all hours of the day. Now, my biggest pet peeve is the use of our celebrities to promote unhealthy eating habits, which really promotes unhealthy eating amongst our youth who look up to these celebrities and want to be like them and mimic their behaviors. And so when they are used to promote the consumption of these unhealthy foods, that contributes to our youth making unhealthy decisions. And then, of course, there's the advertisements of foods that look nothing like the pictures in the ads when we get them, right? Here's a Burger King burger, looks perfect and prim and proper. But in reality, when we get the burger, it's all smashed up and looks nothing like what is presented in the poster. So don't be duped by making fast food choices that are not the healthiest. And so all of these targeted marketing ads really play into the distinction between appetite and hunger. So the appetite is our desire to consume food, right? It's psychological. So when we see an advertisement on TV of sauce and cheese dripping down and bacon dripping off of a burger, oh, it looks so delicious. It's a stimulating cue and it makes us want to consume that food. Versus hunger is a drive to consume food. It's physiological, it's hormonally regulated. It comes from our body telling us that we are hungry and our body needs food, needs to consume food and nutrients. So when we have these targeted marketing ads, that's essentially ignoring our hunger cues and instead triggering our appetite cues. So I want to leave you with saying that creating a healthy lifestyle does not happen overnight. This is a process. It can take months and even years to really develop optimal habits for yourself. So first and foremost, some of the empowerment actions you might take today are reviewing the dietary guidelines. Maybe you might start making a meal plan for yourself this weekend. One key thing that you always want to keep in mind is make your plate colorful. Read the nutrition facts when you're grocery shopping. When you're eating out, you can read the nutrition facts as well. It's not always advertised anymore, but you can either look it up online or even ask for a nutrition facts menu. Pay attention to serving size and portion size, one, when you're making food at home, and also when you're looking at those nutrition labels. Be mindful of your added sugar, sodium, and saturated fat intake, and tracking your food, which is also, I would say, hard to do, but at least you can start somewhere, even if that means you're just tracking how much sodium you're consuming or how much added sugar you're consuming. Want to put a plug in again for the Diabetes Prevention Lifestyle Program. We talk a lot about nutrition, food tracking, how to make healthy choices, what to do when you're grocery shopping, different barriers and things. So highly recommend looking into a program. And again, we'll provide that link along with some of other links around the dietary guidelines, et cetera, in the survey. So I know we're a little short on time for questions, but I will open the floor for questions at this time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Candice. We do have a few questions that have come up. One quick one that I just want to touch on is I saw a request about getting the recordings. I can definitely send that out when I send out a reminder to complete the post survey for people who help us out with those numbers. And we like to have the feedback. It gives us a little bit of data on how we're doing with our webinars. But we also did drop our YouTube channel in the chat. And the YouTube channel will have all of the recordings that sometimes take a little bit longer to make it to the website. So our apologies if you have checked the website and didn't see the recordings. They do make it to our YouTube channel before they hit the website. So that link there is in the chat. And then one question that comes to mind that I saw in the Q&A box is if there are any recommendations of beverages that are healthy to consume. Of course, I think of water is always the best choice. And if there's anything else that you'd like to weigh in there too, Candice.
Yes, always drink water, stay hydrated throughout the day, especially in the summer months. It's very important. Even if you do want to consume other beverages, make sure you're well hydrated. Other options, sparkling water. Some people are fans, some people are not fans, but it's great because it gives you flavor, right? And it still gives you that fizziness that soda provides. But if you're trying to not have soda, but you want something bubbly water is a great option. If you're somebody that drinks a lot of sugar sweetened beverages, you can consume artificial sweetened beverages, but I do not like to promote it per se. But I will say it's a good tool if you're trying to wean yourself off. But the best option really is to drink water. And even if you do drink artificial sweetened beverages, you don't want to drink a lot of that. Basically, anything that's not natural, you want to avoid if you can. We're now, although we don't have any clinical trial data that demonstrates any negative effects of artificial sweetened beverage consumption, we do have some epidemiological studies that are surfacing, not a lot, but some suggesting that there's an association with obesity. But the problem with that is, and with diabetes as well, the problem with that and why we don't really have an answer as to why, or whether or not artificial sweetened beverages are actually a healthy option is because there's something called reverse causality. So it could be that the associations that we're finding might just be simply a reflection of the fact that the individuals who already have obesity and diabetes are choosing to consume artificial sweetened beverages as a way to reduce their sugar sweetened beverage intake. So the debate on that is still out. So I always just promote plain water or bubbly water.
Wonderful. On the topic of water, we have a participant wondering, what about Propel water?
Oh, I think that I have not had Propel water, but I don't think it's sweetened. But somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. If it's any type of sports drink that contains minerals, because some of them just contain minerals, they don't have any added sugar, completely fine. And can be actually very good, healthy options, especially if you're sweating and you're being dehydrated. Dehydration is not just about the water intake, it's also about losing salt and potassium. And so when we're drinking non-sweetened beverages that contain some of those minerals, then those can also be beneficial, especially for being physically active as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Additionally, on the subject of beverages, is it generally true that diet sodas are just as bad as regular sodas because of the added sugars?
Yeah, so I was just touching on that. The artificially sweetened beverages usually they don't contain any added sugar. They just contain artificial sweetened sugars, which it's not considered added sugar because it's not, they're artificial, they're sweeteners. The bad thing about consuming artificially sweetened beverages is artificial sweeteners are actually much sweeter than regular table sugar. I mean, I'm talking 100 times, 200 times as sweet as regular table sugar. So what happens when we're consuming a lot of beverages that are sweetened like that, we're adjusting our palate to just consume a lot of sweet things, which in turn, maybe we're not consuming as many sugar sweetened beverages, but we might then have a palate where we want a lot of sweet things in general, right? So we might choose other sweet snacks that are high in calories and high in fat, and sweet foods tend to be high in both fat and sugar, right? So it's also just about the palatability and adjusting your taste buds to not want something that is so sweet. And so avoiding those types of beverages are better just for that fact. And now, there is some evidence that suggests regular consumption of a lot of artificial sweetened beverages can be detrimental to our health. But again, we don't have a lot of research to suggest that. So really it's about knowing how much sweetness you were consuming, even if it doesn't have the calories attached.
Thank you. And I know we're at time, but we do have a few more questions. I will try to get through them quickly. If we don't get to your questions, please do add them to the post survey that goes out. It's a great way where we are able to follow up with you if you've got questions that are unanswered from this webinar. One of the questions that we have in the Q&A box is it good to eat until you are full, or should you eat to quench hunger? I think you touched on this a little bit, but just to clarify and expand on that.
Yes, great question. Okay, so it's actually not technically good to eat till you're full. Ideally, you want to eat until you're satisfied. part of that is because sometimes when we eat, once we've reached the fullness, sometimes we may have consumed too much food, more food than our body actually needs, but the signal from our brain hasn't quite reached our stomach yet. So there's a rule, you may have heard, wait 20 minutes before you get seconds. So that's to allow those signals from your brain to reach your stomach and let you know whether or not you're full. So ideally, you want to eat until you're satisfied. This is especially important if you're trying to lose weight.
Wonderful,
But
thank
you do
you.
want to eat but if you are hungry, also listen to your hunger cues and eat when you're hungry. Just be mindful of whether or not you're satisfied or full.
This next question, I think, is a great question. There are lots of companies out there that kind of put together packaged foods for us and meals. And so we're wondering, do meal programs such as HelloFresh comply with the daily dietary requirements?
Oh, that is a great question. I don't believe they are required to, but I think some of them are mindful of it, but I don't know if they're required to comply.
Okay, thank you. What about if you know of any apps to track the meals, to track sort of how much?
Yes, the only one I'm aware of is MyFitnessPal. I know there are a lot of other ones, but that's the only one I'm familiar with. I could certainly, I might have a list somewhere and can send that later with follow-up.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Candice. This one will especially speak to your heart as a mom. What are a couple of your favorite go-to strategies to sway a toddler who is asking for unhealthy foods like fries and cookies to choose to eat a healthier option?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, first of all, I have a 4-year-old son, and I teach him a lot about eating our vegetables and having special treats for after we've at least finished our vegetables and our protein. So typically, I try to make the point that we should limit things like fast food, so things like fries, as well as cookies and cakes and ice cream, all the kinds of special tasty treats. I try to sometimes make them maybe for special occasions, or maybe have it once a week or something, so that they're not deprived of it per se. When it comes to fries, which is a very common food that lots of toddlers and young kids love, making your own from scratch, especially if you have an air fryer, it's so easy to do, requires less oil, of course, and can be a healthier option. My son loves sweet potato fries, which is great because it's higher in fiber and has other nutrients than just, say, fries made with a russet potato. So encouraging healthy eating, so understanding that that our body, to grow healthy and strong, we need a lot of vegetables and proteins, and we want to limit things that are high in sugar. I talk to my son about sugar all the time, so he always tells me, "Oh, mommy, I can't have that. That's too much sugar," right? So teaching them at a young age is very important, especially they're going to be around peer pressure and at the birthday parties and even in school, and they need to be able to regulate what they're choosing to eat.
We will take today. We're a little bit over time, so thank you again for your time, Candice, as well as for everyone hanging on with us. This quick one I can answer myself. We can share the links for the SNAP resources. I will send that out and follow up to this webinar along with our post survey questionnaire. And then another question that we have is, if you are looking for that extra boost in the day, what type of alternatives would you recommend compared to energy drinks and coffee?
Okay, this might be anecdotal, and it is anecdotal. I have actually used apple cider vinegar. I find that mimics the effects of caffeinated coffee, at least it has for me. So just, a teaspoon or so in a cup of water. Sometimes I just drink mine straight. Maybe that's not good. I don't know. But I find that apple cider vinegar actually can be really healthy. And then, get outside, go for a walk, get some fresh air. 20 minutes of a nice brisk walk can also help get that blood flowing and increase your energy.
Replied to that last question that was in the Q&A box. So that's actually all of the questions that we have.
Perfect. Well, thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Ambria, do you mind taking us to the upcoming events slide? Wonderful. Thank you so much. So just as a reminder, this is again a 7-part series. Candice is leading the first 6 sessions of this series. Our next session is going to focus on exercise and diabetes prevention. That will be happening at the same time, 5 p.m. August 24th. Also on August 24th, earlier in the day, we will be having our caregiving series, Managing Caregiving for Loved Ones. The next session, number 5 for this series, Sleep, Your Body, and Diabetes Risk, will happen on Thursday, September 7th, also at 5 p.m. Also on September 7th, we'll be busy for those next few ones that we've got. We will have the next series, the final session, excuse me, on caring for the caregiver. And then session 6 of this series will be happening on September 21st. And coming up in October, on October 19th, we will be having a webinar on the Non-Toxic Black Beauty Project. So you can check out our events page for more more information on how to register for those. And again, we thank everyone for being with us tonight. I think there's one more slide that we can show that has just a little bit about how to connect with us on, there we go. On Instagram and Facebook, we can be found at Your CBHN. On LinkedIn, we can be found as the California Black Health Network. And on Twitter, we can be found at Your CBHN. I see here that we don't have our YouTube channel, so I'll be sure to add that next time when we meet for our webinar, but we did drop that in the chat, and I will also include that in follow-up to today's presentation. Again, thank you all so much for being with us, and have a wonderful night.